Hello, and welcome to your first video lecture. This lecture should take about 30 to 45 minutes. We're going to cover one chapter in this video lecture. At the end of the video lecture, there will be four or five discussion questions. Please prepare 2 pages, not 2 pages per question, but 2 pages totally in answering those discussion questions. What I want you to do, though, is I want you to prepare it like you are writing a memo to your boss. So in other words, I want you to write it in memo format to your boss, and I want you to answer the discussion questions. If you go over 2 pages, that's fine, but try to keep it as glib and as short and as to the point as you possibly can. In addition, at the end of this lecture, right after I show the the discussion questions, I will go over the concepts that are included on the upcoming quiz on the next Monday where we meet. So what you'll find, and just to prepare you, is what you'll find is you're going to find the chapter, and then after that you're going to find the discussion questions, and that'll go on for about 20 seconds. Pause the video so that you can understand the discussion questions. Then after that, I will talk to you about the concepts that are going to be explored on the upcoming quiz. Until then, until we meet on Monday, I will see you and we will talk then. So Chapter 3 is all about ethics. Ethics being the foundation for a relationship in any selling environment. You know, with salespeople, oftentimes there are ethical questions. Whether you tell the prospect the absolute truth, whether you hide something from the prospect, etc. The only way to build a relationship in selling, however, is to build that relationship on mutual trust. The prospect has to trust you, you have to trust the prospect. Therefore, even if you have to deliver the bad news to the prospect, like there's a backorder situation, or that there is a flaw in your product, or something like that, you need to be upfront, you need to be honest, because that's the only way you're going to build trust. The last thing you want to do with a good client, a good customer, or a good prospect is to break that trust. You break that bond of trust, and you're going to be scrambling forever trying to get that prospect back. Once you break that trust once, it's very difficult to bring that trust back, and oftentimes you'll lose that client and that customer. Now, I am sure in every single one of your classes that you've taken so far in the business community, and I know in every class that I teach, we always talk about ethics and ethical environment. Ethics is one of our strong principles here at St. John Fisher. It's also one of the learning objectives that we have for the School of Business, which is teaching and understanding the ethical environment. So I'm glad that the textbook has tackled ethics in the 3rd chapter versus waiting for later on in the chapters to attack it. So relationship skills are needed today in a complex selling environment. Again, we talked the last time we were together last Monday, we talked about product parity. I used an example of cell phones for product parity, etc. We talked about there is a lot of information out there, and really anymore, you've got to remember that the buyer has all the power. The buyer can buy from anywhere, given the internet. You can buy from overseas, you can buy directly from the manufacturer, you can buy from a distributor, etc. So the buyer has all the power. The way to succeed in today's complex selling environment, the way to succeed is to build that trust, build that relationship, help the client with their problems, understand the client's needs, understand the client's problems, understand what really is preventing that client from reaching their goals, and then helping them solve that need. So again, with any relationship and with any type of relationship environment, you need ethical standards, and you really need to be upfront and ethical in every aspect of the selling process. And again, sometimes it's not easy to be ethical. Sometimes you want to maybe not tell the prospect the whole truth. Sometimes a prospect will ask you about your competition and the price of your competition. And sometimes your price may be higher than your competition. But be upfront with the prospect. Be upfront with the customer, because they will find out. And if they find out that you've lied to them, well, that just cuts down any type of business relationship that you would have. So emotional intelligence is the capacity for monitoring our own feelings and those of the other. When you take a look at emotional intelligence, I look at wearing your emotions on your sleeve. Now, if you're happy, if you're generally a happy person, then you can wear your emotions on your sleeve. You can show everybody that you're a happy person. Here's the thing, though. One of the issues with selling, and I was just talking to Dr. Hodis about this yesterday during our meeting. You know, salespeople would be considered failures. Now, think this one through. Salespeople would be considered failures in any other job. Generally speaking, you're going to hear no 60% of the time. You're going to not make that sale 60% of the time. A good top salesperson probably closes 35 to 40% of their deals. Think that one through. Now, that doesn't mean that they don't eventually get that customer. You might call on that customer for a long time. They continue to say no, 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 and then they say yes. But you're going to hear a lot of no's before you hear that yes. That means 60% of the time you're going to fail. Now, think about that. Suppose 60% of the time an accountant made a mistake. Or 60% of the time a finance person made a mistake in the books. Or 60% of the time a production person made a defect in the product in which they're producing. They would be a failure. But we think that 40% success, anything around 50%, 40, 50% success is fantastic in the selling environment. That means you're going to hear no a lot. You're going to hear no more than you hear yes. You need to understand that when you hear no and you've got to call on the next client or the next prospect or the next customer, you can't wear that disappointment on your sleeve. And that's part of emotional intelligence. Being self-aware, being adaptable. When you hear no, smile. That doesn't mean no forever. It might just mean no, not right now. I remember when I was selling for the TCM group, our consulting business. I was working on this particular client, and they said no. They said, no, we don't want your services. We're looking at your competitor. I was crushed because this was a very good prospect. However, I continued to work. I continued to build that relationship. I continued to build that trust, and eventually we did get the business. So if I would have let that emotional intelligence sway my judgment and not called on them again, not continued to stay positive, I would have never made that sale. So that is what we mean by emotional intelligence. What we mean is we mean the capacity to monitor and to control your own feelings, especially when you hear no, or especially if a prospect or a customer is mad. Suppose you've got a backorder situation and you can't get the material, you can't get the product to the customer, and they're angry with you. You can't take that and wear it on your sleeve for the next client, for the next customer. So information age selling is all about building new relationships. It's about prospecting. It's about understanding, using different CRM software to understand customers, to understand prospects. And it's transforming those prospects into customer relationship, even if you never do business with them. Again, another story, when I was selling for the TCM group, there was a customer, it was Genesee Brewery. And I worked on trying to get the business there. And I never did. However, we, myself and the VP of operations became very, very close. We became very good friends, and we would have lunch together 2-3 times a year. And he actually recommended our business to another one of his friends in another industry, and I got that business. So even if you don't get the business with a particular prospect or customer, that doesn't mean that you can't maintain a relationship, because they might recommend your product, your services, or whatever you're selling to someone that they know. So we need to manage those relationships, both positive, both the customer and prospect, or the customer and the salesperson relationship, as well as the prospect and the customer relationship, or a prospect and the sales relationship. Because sometimes you're not going to get the business. However, by maintaining that relationship, you might get a referral, you might get a reference, and you might get another piece of business that you weren't expecting. So here's some ethical decisions. I want you to take a look at these, and I want you to think about what would I do if a customer asked you to create a set of product specifications for completing a sales proposal, and then you find out that a supplier indicates a sizable direct cash payment to you if you listed the supplier's technical data in the specification. So what do? Oftentimes we found, and we talked about this on Monday, we find that a manufacturer would go and grease the skids for you, maybe call on an end user or something like that if you're a distributor. So there are ethical decisions to be made. I know also in one point in time I was selling, and here's another ethical decision for you. At one point in time I was selling to a particular prospect, and the prospect came in and said, the company that we're using right now just doesn't get it. They don't have a good program for us. We've used you in the past, which I have done business with them. We've used you in the past. We really like your program. We didn't call you because you were much more expensive, but I think you really understand our needs. We'd like to write a program for us, a particular training program. I did, and they took that training program and they gave it to my competitor and said, train this. They wanted to go with my competitor because they were less expensive than me. Very unethical for the prospect, but that happens in business. Again, emotional intelligence, etc. So there's ethical decisions that need to be made both on the prospect or the customer standpoint, as well as there's ethical decisions to be made from a sales perspective. So another ethical decision, I'm going to give you a minute. You might want to put the video on pause right now and read this. I want you to be thinking about these ethical decisions, because these things do come into fruition. They are a part of everyday business, and hopefully you will make the right decisions when there's ethical decisions that need to be made. And then finally, again, if you want to put the video on pause, take a look at this. Here's another one of the ethical decisions, or another ethical challenge, so to speak, in the world of professional selling today. So ethical decision making, the foundation starts with ethics. You start at the very base is ethical decision making, ethics, creating partner value, making sure that you're creating that partner trust. So ethics is the foundation. Then we go up with the relationship strategy, building a relationship strategy, understanding each other's needs. And it's not just the relationship with the prospect or the customer or the client. It's also having the client have a relationship with you or the salesperson. And that becomes really the second step on the foundation of trust. Then you have your product strategy and your customer strategy and your presentation strategy. All those is your foundation of your selling strategy. But again, it starts with ethical decision making, being upfront with the prospect or the customer, making sure that you don't lie to the prospect or customer, and make sure that you tell the prospect or customer the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. So, factors influencing the ethical behavior. One is conduct. The other one is personal values. If you're an ethical person, you're generally going to act ethically. If you're a trusting person, you're also going to generally trust a prospect. So it really starts from your foundation and who you are. Also, role models within the organization. It says here role models within the sales manager, but also role models within the VP of marketing, the VP of sales, all the way down from the CEO. You look at some of the horribly unethical companies out there, from the Enrons to the WorldComs and that type of thing. Ethics starts at the top. It starts with the CEO, the C-suite, the CFO, the CMO, etc., VP of operations, VP of marketing, and moves down from there. So if management, generally speaking, is ethical, and if management basically does ethical things, then they can demand and expect it from their salespeople all the way down to every employee within the organization. Also, ethical policies that are laid down by that upper management in the C-suite. And not just writing ethical policies saying that we're going to be ethics and putting it in our mission statement and everything else, but actually writing those policies and then enacting on those policies. And then, of course, being role models throughout the whole organization. Those really are the foundations of ethical behavior. Now, you got to remember, when we talk about ethics, we're not talking about laws. Most people will not break the law for fear of being punished, being thrown in jail, being fined, etc. So when it comes to ethics, when it comes to morals, and when it comes to law, there's a delineation there. Generally speaking, the law is somewhat black and white. You know what is against the law. You know what's not against the law, right? Bribery, etc. is against the law. We can't do it here in the United States. We also can't do it when we deal with other countries and other companies outside the United States. That's the law. Generally speaking, people will follow the law. It's when there is a moral dilemma or an ethical dilemma that's not against the law, but you know it's not right. That's when salespeople get into trouble. Everybody knows right from wrong. The question is, can we do right from wrong when it really counts? So ethics and culture, again, from the last model we saw, we know that ethics is part of the culture. Ethics starts at the top, just like culture starts at the top and then moves down. Ethics and culture is the total sum of beliefs, values, and knowledge. There are cultural differences among different countries, among different companies, etc. There's cultural differences from one company to another, and from one country to another, and from one continent to another. Oftentimes over in Africa, you see a lot of bribery is a way of life. It's a way of doing business. Whereas we know here in the United States, even if it's a way of doing business over there, it is against the law. It is against our international laws to bribe. So even if somebody else is doing it, even if another country is bribing another country, we still cannot do it because it's against the law. So there is cultural differences everywhere. Building relationships in some of those countries is even more difficult than building relationships here in the United States. And some of those countries internationally have some really direct ethical challenges as they move forward. So again, it doesn't make any difference whether you're doing business in a country like Indonesia, where bribery is a way of life, or Ethiopia, or one of those other African countries where bribery tends to be done. Even though it's done there, doesn't mean that it's right and doesn't mean that we can do it. Ethics is not when in Rome, do as the Romans do. Ethics is what's right and what's wrong. So doing in business in China, you can read the slides here. We talked about different cultures and how different cultures are strange to us in some cases. China still has censorship. Just ask Google. That was a big problem or a big issue with Google when Google went into China, because Google stands for freedom of press, freedom of speech, etc. And China certainly did censor them. So here's some different things in China. Be patient, be prepared for negotiations. Harmonious relationships are a very important thing in China. Gifts are something that is done often in China, whereas in the United States, just about in every company you deal with, most of the times you can't give gifts that would be over $10. And be careful of the meanings of gifts. Now again, we talked about ethics and we talked about the law. We talked about the legal issues and the legalities of ethics, etc. Most people will follow the law, because if you don't follow the law, it's punishable. It's punishable by fines, jail time, or what have you. So the law in the United States is very cut and very dried with regards to bribery and other ethical conditions. However, as I've said in my international business class when I taught it last semester, and when I've said in this class, there is no global watchdog. There is no global police force. There is nothing out there that are going to stop certain countries from acting where they see fit, but we don't see fit. For instance, child labor laws will vary widely throughout the world. Some people find that 12-year-olds, 11-year-olds, there is no child labor law, and it's not uncommon for an 11 or a 12-year-old to go to work. Whereas we think that, the 15 is the least in the child labor law. So again, there is no global watchdog. The only global watchdog out there is consumers. If in fact they feel like an organization is acting unethically or buying from somebody who they think is acting unethically, well, then consumers can stop doing business with them. There is no global watchdog. We do have Foreign Corrupt Practices Acts and the UK Anti-Bribery Act, etc., but that only goes so far. Because in other countries, they don't have those types of things. We know of child labor laws, but that only goes so far. Because in other countries, they don't have child labor laws. For instance, parts of Vietnam, there are people harvesting shrimp. There's young girls harvesting shrimp, 10 and 11-year-old, in neck-deep water, 12 hours a day. They find that is appropriate there. We find that it isn't here. So the legal issues are going to vary widely. There is no global watchdog. The only global watchdog out there that will really maintain ethical principles is the customers and those that buy from people. If you don't feel like someone's doing the right thing, stop buying from them. If enough people stop buying from them, then they will get the message. So, influence of senior management is huge on ethical standards. It filters down from the top. We talked about that in about 3 slides ago when we talked about the model. If senior management tends to behave ethically and also walks the walk and talks the talk, then generally speaking, employees will also behave ethically. It comes down from the top. The top management, VPs of marketing, VPs of sales, set the moral tone in the organization, and they expect that moral tone to be followed. If in fact they are not acting morally, ethically, like in the case of Enron or in the case of WorldCom or in the case of some of those others, Arthur Andersen, some of those other organizations out there, if top management is not acting ethically, it's almost impossible for them to expect their employees to act ethically. Again, we all know right from wrong. We know what's good. We know what's bad. And ethics starts with you. Even if everybody else is doing it, that still does not make it right. And salespeople sometimes get caught up in that. They know maybe their competitor's not acting ethically, and their competitor might be winning business by not acting ethically. But eventually, right is right and wrong is wrong, and that competitor is going to get in trouble. But it's really, really difficult to watch those sales go to a competitor because the competitor is acting unethically. But it will catch up. It will. So, morals, ethics are established by top management out there. If they are acting ethically, then yes, they should be able to expect their employees to act ethically also. Company policies, we also talked about that in our framework, in our ethical framework. I don't want to belabor this or rehash that, but we have talked about not only setting down ethical policies, but upholding those ethical policies, punishing those employees that do not uphold the ethical policies, and not rewarding unethical behavior. And again, it's easy to do. Someone's out there making a lot of sales within the company, but you know that they're not acting ethically. You see that person getting rewarded through commissions, bonuses, promotions, and things like that. You start to think, well, why can't I do it? Well, the reason you can't do it is because it's not right. And we need to understand that. We need to know what's right from wrong, and we need to act what's right from wrong. So, company policies not only influence salespeople in their own company, but also influence distributors that might be selling people's products, OEMs that might be selling their own products, customer service, product development, every department within the organization, and every extension within the organization, the distributors that are representing you by selling your product. So all of these things you see on this next slide would have to do with a sales representative. In other words, organizations must have strict rules, strict policies governing each one of these things, like sharing confidential information, reciprocity, bribery, which we know is illegal, but they have to have strict rules on this. Giving gifts, what is done, what's not done. What type of entertainment? Can you take them out to dinner? How much can you spend on dinner, etc., etc. The use of the internet and all these different things. So all of these are situations that salespeople would find themselves falling into, and therefore organizations must have strict policies on this. So your values are your deep personal beliefs. Your values lead to your attitude, either constructive or destructive. That attitude leads to behavior, either ethical or unethical. So it starts with you. It starts with your own values, and then your value influences your attitude. That attitude then is going to influence your behavior, your ethical behavior. And that's what's important. So it doesn't matter what your competitor's doing. It doesn't even matter what other sales reps are doing within your own organization. It matters what you think and how you feel. So business ethics are principles and standards that guide behavior. They translate values into foundational behaviors, and they determine what's right and what's wrong. Again, the law is black and white. Ethical decision-making and ethical behavior doesn't necessarily mean it's against the law. It just might not be the right thing to do. So developing a personal code of ethics starts from you inside, relationships, being honest with oneself, being honest with one's prospect or customers, and it's an exchange of value. What do you value? What does your prospect value? What do people within your organization value? And how do they value those types of things? If you value trust, and if your prospect or customer values trust, then the foundation of your relationship must be on an ethical foundation. So that concludes the lecture. The next two slides are your discussion questions. There are 5 discussion questions. Again, I'd like to have at least 2 pages. If you want to go over 2 pages, you can, explaining and answering these questions. However, I do want it in the form of a business memo to your boss. Pretend that I am your boss, and I want you to write a business memo that answers or discusses these questions. So you might want to put the video on pause, because these are the questions as well as these. So again, there are 5 questions. You can back the video up and write them down. However you want to do it is fine with me. I'm looking forward to seeing you again in a couple of Mondays. And again, in just a few minutes, I'll be back with some concepts that you're going to need to study for to do well on the next quiz. Until I come back in just a few minutes with those concepts, I will see you later. And I'm back. So for the exam, you're going to want to understand the 3 prescriptions involved in developing a personal selling philosophy. Also, you're going to want to know the definition of business ethics as well as the definition of morals. You're going to want to understand the relationship strategy that we talked about in the 2nd chapter. You're also going to want to understand emotional intelligence and the different eras, the marketing era, the selling era, the strategic selling era, etc. You're going to understand the uses of social media. You're going to understand the marketing mix. You're also going to understand the difference between ethics and morals. I want you also to understand B2B channels versus B2C channels. I also want you to understand the different ways of selling into B2B channels and B2C channels. Mostly it's in Chapter 2. Also in Chapter 2, the consultative selling era. Understand that. Understand customer sales representatives on, inside salespeople versus outside salespeople. Understand bribery. Understand business slander, and understand puffery. What's the difference between puffery and what's the difference between business slander? And what's the difference between lying? Puffery would be something like the world's greatest cup of coffee. Whenever I think of puffery, I think of Elf, the movie Elf, when he takes her and it says the world's greatest cup of coffee. That's puffery. That is not lying. That is exaggeration. Lying is absolutely lying. Understand CRM. Understand the consultative sales presentation guide, which is in your book. Understand transactional selling. Understand service selling, which is also all in Chapter 2. Understand which is the strategy of the consultative selling model, which is also in Chapter 2. Understand the pay gap between men and women, which is in the ethical chapter in the book. I didn't talk about it in the slides, but it's in the book. And finally, that's just about it. That covers up a lot of the different concepts that we're going to be talking about in the quiz on Monday. With that, I hope you guys have a great week. And again, I will see you next Monday.